EUCOM have never been clearer. For more than a year, Russia has waged a brutal, unprovoked war on Ukraine, inflicting terrible suffering on the people of Ukraine and threatening European stability. The Ukrainians have fought with incredible courage and skill to repel Russia's vicious assault, defending the same values and freedoms that we cherish. Ukraine has achieved some very notable successes, but there is hard fighting ahead and more to be done. Throughout this conflict, the NATO alliance has shown remarkable unity and resolve. A formidable coalition of our allies has joined together to provide military and humanitarian support to Ukraine and impose severe costs on Russia's economy. If Putin thought his war would drive a wedge between NATO and members and within the international community, he was badly mistaken. NATO unity has never been stronger, and many European nations are taking steps to invest greater proportions of their budgets and institutional energies to improve their military capabilities. Indeed, in a triumphant moment for NATO, Finland recently joined the alliance. This was an utter rejection of Russia's strategic goals, and I know the Finns will contribute significantly to the alliance, and I hope we will soon welcome Sweden as well. President Biden deserves great credit for marshaling these efforts. His administration continues to provide critical military equipment and training to Ukraine, including combat vehicles like Abrams tanks, Strykers, and Bradleys, as well as weapons like HIMARS, howitzers, Patriot air defense systems, and various types of ammunition. This equipment, in concert with contributions and training from across the alliance, has provided an important mix of capabilities to bolster Ukrainian effectiveness on the battlefield. Let there be no doubt, the United States will continue to help Ukraine succeed on the battlefield. America's assistance to Ukraine is also an investment in our own national security interest. Beyond repelling Putin, we know China is watching closely, and we must succeed. General Cavoli, the NATO alliance has made important progress in its ability to generate and maintain the collective force posture, operations, and investments necessary to deter Russian aggression against its members, and the United States has played a key role in those efforts. At the same time, the security environment in Europe has experienced a tectonic shift. I would like to know your views and plans for U.S. military activities and investments in the EUCOM area of responsibility in light of these changes. General Van Ovost, Transcom is also playing a critical role in our support to Ukraine. American troops continue to operate forward logistics centers to receive, identify, and transport the majority of security aid intended for Ukraine and across and from the international community. This has been an enormous task, executed with impressive skill on little notice. I would appreciate an update on these efforts and any lessons learned that you may have to share. Keeping an eye to the future and the pacing threat of China, an important reality we are learning is that any potential adversary is going to attack our logistics support system. This idea of contested logistics will include obvious threats to our forward bases, as well as the aircraft and ships that resupply those bases. But it could also include cyber attacks against information technology systems that support our deployments, both government and commercial, and possible kinetic attacks against ports and airfields supporting our deployments. I am concerned that our thinking about logistics during conflict has too often defaulted to our uncontested military dominance since World War II. We have always owned the sea and airlines of communication and have only had to worry about logistics efficiency, not effectiveness. General Van Ovost, I would like to know what steps Transcom is taking to prepare for such threats to our logistics and how the military services can alter their acquisition programs to take these concerns into account. I thank you again to our witnesses, and I look forward to your testimonies. As a reminder for my colleagues, at the conclusion of the open session of this hearing, we will recess for the joint session of Congress. We will then reconvene for the closed session at 12:30 p.m. in room SVC 217. We are committed to allowing all of our colleagues to ask questions, so if the assembly time arrives, we'll continue in the open session until everyone has an opportunity to do so. In lieu of Senator Wicker's arrival shortly, I will ask General Cavoli to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Reed, to Ranking Member Wicker, of course, as well. Distinguished members of the committee, it's a privilege to testify before you today and in many cases to see you again. On behalf of the men, women, and the families of US-UCOM, first of all, I thank you for your steadfast support to their mission, to their safety, and to their well-being. I'd also like to recognize and thank my command senior enlisted leader, CSM Rob Abernathy, sitting behind me here, who accompanied me here today. He is representing our non-commissioned officers, our enlisted soldiers, and our families who remain America's asymmetric advantage against any adversary. So thank you, Rob, for being here. I'm very pleased to appear today beside my good friend and colleague, Jackie Van Ovost, whose U.S. Transportation Command is unlike anything else on the globe, and who works miracles every day. Thank you, Jackie, to your whole command. So this is, as the chairman noted, an unprecedented time in Euro-Atlantic area. 14 months ago, Russia's illegal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine dramatically shifted perceptions of European stability and our broader global security. It galvanized European governments' resolve. Last year's NATO summit in Madrid was a turning point for the alliance. Nations committed to a new strategic concept that put collective territorial defense at the top of the alliance task list for the first time in 35 years. And for the first time since the Cold War, it set into motion a series of efforts that will profoundly change the military structure and activities of NATO. We have been creating new plans. That is, Allied Command Operations has been creating new plans for the general defense of the alliance. And these will drive higher levels of readiness and more targeted national defense investments, especially on the part of our allies. Nations agreed to accelerate defense spending increases, to establish enhanced force posture on the eastern flank of NATO, to turn unprecedented numbers of troops and weapons over to NATO command and control, and critically, to bring 2 new members into the alliance. Happy to note, as the chairman did, that Finland has already joined, and we hope soon to see Sweden as a member as well. Over time, these efforts inside the alliance will lead to significantly increased European military capabilities and will continue to deter aggression against the alliance. That deterrent posture has allowed us to work intensively in the past year or so to assist Ukraine. In the past year, thanks to your support, U.S. donations of arms, ammunition, equipment, vehicles, and supplies have enabled Ukraine to halt Russia's invasion. We have not been alone in this effort. The DoD and US-UCOM lead an international effort represented by the 50-plus member UDCG, Ukraine Donors Contact Group. We have an effort together to identify, transport, and deliver equipment and ammunition to Ukraine, along with the training to use that equipment in combat. This material support and the training provided by international donors has been huge and fundamental to the Ukrainian military's success so far. Over the winter, our coalition has enabled the Ukrainian military to generate the military capabilities necessary to defend and regain parts of their sovereign territory. We're confident our Ukrainian partners are good stewards of donated aid. Our embassy team in Kyiv, led by Brigadier General Garrick Harmon, and the Security Assistance Group in Ukraine, located in Germany, work diligently to monitor and keep a close eye on all lethal aid to ensure it is getting to and staying in the right hands. Although we remain optimistic for Ukraine's future and sovereignty, this war is far from over. Russia will remain an acute threat to Euro-Atlantic security, and the National Defense Strategy rightly calls our attention to that. But Russia's not the only problem in Europe. The People's Republic of China continues to increase its access and influence in our theater, and its activities pose risk to U.S., allied, and partner interests. The PRC uses foreign direct investment, government-backed business ventures, and loans to gain access to technology and to gain control over vital European infrastructure and transportation routes. Finally, Europe continues to face transnational challenges as well, such as violent extremist organizations, uncontrolled migration, organized crime, and even climate change. EUCOM trains and cooperates with allies and partners to help counter those challenges as well. Our strategic approach fortifies our allies and our partners. It strengthens alliance interoperability and enhances our collective combat capability, which deters our adversaries. And as always, should deterrence fail, US-UCOM, alongside our allies and partners, is ready to fight and win. Your continued support for our efforts The authorities and the funding you give us are critical to our ability to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General Cavoli. General Van Ovost, your statement, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, distinguished members of the committee, good morning. It's my honor to join you today with my senior enlisted leader, Fleet Master Chief Donald Myrick, to represent the men and women of the United States Transportation Command as we defend the nation, take care of our people, and succeed through teamwork. I'm extremely proud of our team of logistics professionals who lead the Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise, continually exceed expectations, and ensure hope, deterrence, and victory are assured as we contribute to our nation's defense. From competition to crisis, the entire enterprise proudly delivers for our nation, our allies, and our partners. We know our success in the European theater and beyond would not be possible without the steadfast support of this committee and the whole of Congress. To maintain the unrivaled strategic advantage to project and sustain the joint force over global distances through natural disasters, pandemics, conflicts, peace, and war, while defending our homeland, we must preserve our logistical dominance. Our organic fleet, along with our commercial transportation partners, must continue to present credible deterrence and requires proactive efforts to recapitalize and modernize. My highest concerns lie in reductions in capacity and readiness in both sea lift and air refueling. We are a generation late in recapitalizing a ready sea lift fleet to meet our national objectives. The average age of our 44 roll-on, roll-off ships we use to surge from the continental United States is 44 years old. In fact, 17 of the 44 ships are 50 years or older. Transcom supports the Navy's strategy to acquire used sea lift vessels from the commercial market and further requests to provide Secretary of Defense discretionary authority to purchase foreign-built used ships under favorable market conditions without limitation on number. I greatly appreciate your support for stabilized funding towards our sea lift recapitalization effort, and I'm heartened by the current progress on the first 5 ships. We've also taken steps to address the department's shortfall in meeting wartime fuel delivery demands and the vulnerable position of continued reliance on the use of foreign flag, foreign crewed tanker vessels. We are working with MARAD to implement the Tanker Security Program, which will provide assured access to U.S. flag tankers and begin to reduce risk in sea lift tanker capacity. In addition to the Tanker Security Program, we fully support the Maritime Security Program, the Jones Act, and cargo preference laws that all work together to ensure we have the necessary U.S. flag capability and U.S. mariners during peacetime and ready to move sensitive defense materials during a national emergency. In every domain, American workers are critical to the joint force transportation and logistics. In particular, maritime stakeholders have been experiencing challenges with recruiting and retaining mariners. We support MARAD and industry efforts to identify strategies that address the mariner shortage and ensure their readiness. In the air refueling fleet is the backbone of rapid global mobility and is our most stressed capability. Transcom supports the Air Force's continued efforts towards focused modernization of the fleet, uninterrupted tanker recapitalization, and accelerated pursuit of the next-generation air refueling system to ensure our capacity and readiness remains credible to cover simultaneous global requirements. Future operations will also require high degrees of battle space awareness and leveraging data to align scarce mobility resources with the greatest strategic needs. Integration into battle networks, resourcing cryptographic modernization, cybersecurity, and ensuring resilient positioning, navigation, and timing are among my top priorities. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act expires at the end of this year, which provides essential and irreplaceable insights on the activities of critical foreign targets. The loss of this authority, or renewal in diminished or unusable form, would profoundly damage the department's ability to see and mitigate some of the most profound threats against the United States and our allies and partners. Therefore, reauthorization is a matter of utmost priority. Just as we are engaged globally in our flagship transformational effort, the Global Household Goods Contract will bring accountability that does not exist in the current program of dispersed vendors. We owe it to our members and their families to ensure that they have the very best relocation experience that we can provide. I am honored to join General Cavoli today, where we are in lockstep to provide critical aid to enable Ukraine's national defense that in turn delivers success for the United States, our allies, and our nation. I would like to thank you once again for your leadership and for the support you provide our workforce, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General Van Ovost. Senator Wicker has suggested that we proceed with questioning, and when he's called upon, he'll have an opportunity to submit his statement and also ask his question. So let me begin. Both General Ovost and Van Ovost and General Cavoli have absolutely critical positions. In fact, General Cavoli, the Ukrainian situation is the most pressing military situation in the world at the moment. Unfortunately, here in the Senate, we've reached an impasse in terms of the promotion of non-controversial general officers on a routine basis, usually by unanimous consent. Could you indicate what effects this will have on your operational capacity, but also on the morale and personal dynamics of families?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in an operational sense, if I have officers who are scheduled to retire, general officers who are scheduled to retire, and do so, but I don't have somebody to replace them, I'll suffer a gap in that. Some of those are in fairly critical positions right now. For example, the chairman's military representative to the military committee, General John Diedrich, is scheduled to retire this summer. His replacement hasn't been confirmed, so would have a gap in the chairman's representation at that rank at the military committee in NATO, which in my U.S. role is a vital connection between me and the chairman to influence activities in NATO. And in my role as SACU, of course, it's very useful to have a line to the U.S. military representative. So that's one example, sir.
Well, thank you. And General Ovost, your perceptions?
Thank you, Chairman. Besides any operational impacts from not being able to rotate general officers into positions of significant responsibility, the United States Transportation Command is responsible for moving 311,000 families every year around the globe. It's important to continue these movements so that the children can be enrolled in schools, they can find adequate housing, and ensure that they are ready to succeed in their new responsibilities. So these delays add additional stress to our military families who already sacrifice enough.
Thank you very much, General Ovost, Van Ovost. General Cavoli, there's been some discussion about the relative contributions of NATO countries and other countries to this fight. If we look simply at the dimension of military equipment, military supplies, that's one measure. But overall, in terms of accepting refugees, in terms of supporting those refugees, the Kiel Institute has analyzed that total input and indicates that the U.S. was ranked 12th in terms of the amount of GDP. The 11 preceding countries are European countries. It raises the question of how important these contributions are to the battlefield, even though they don't represent military equipment or military advice.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity to comment on this topic. So first of all, the United States can and should be extremely proud of the quantity of aid that we've given and the leadership role we've taken. I think that's absolutely imperative to note up front. And in gross numbers, I think it's very fair by whichever mode of calculation we arrive at a gross number. The U.S. clearly is the leader. In terms of proportion, though, you're right. I mean, more than half a dozen allies have given a greater share of their GDP in military aid to the Ukrainians. I can't speak to all the other types of aid, but maybe I can give a little bit of a couple of illustrations. 514 tanks have been given by the West to the Ukrainians in the past few months. None of them have come from the United States yet. Our Abrams won't get there until later in the year. 16 mid-level or high-level air defense systems have been given. 2 of those were given by the United States. So there are some genuine donations. More than a third of our allies have given over half of their capacity in a given category to the Ukrainians. I'd be reluctant to be really precise in public, but I'd be delighted to be precise in closed session later today, if you'd like, sir. And then finally, in non-military ways, there's a lot going on. Our allies have treated or are treating about 2,400 grievously wounded Ukrainians in their hospitals, largely in their national defense systems, national health systems. We have treated 4 at Landstuhl. So there are some genuine contributions being made, sir.
Well, thank you very much, General. Let me recognize Senator Wicker. Thank you very much, both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do ask unanimous consent that my opening statement be included after yours in the record.
Without objection.
And I thank the chairman for bringing up the point about burden sharing. And I think it's helpful to reemphasize the 5 million Ukrainian refugees. They're being cared for by Europeans at some considerable cost, 1.5 million in Poland, 920,000 in Germany, 177,000 in the Baltic states, 500,000 in the Czech Republic. And so I'm glad to see the chair bring that up in his first round of questioning. I think one thing that could really harm public opinion here in the United States would be if we found that there was some corruption and siphoning off of money or weapons sold or donated by the United States. And I had a chance to ask you about that earlier, but would you give us your take and any assurance that you could give us that our friends who are actually carrying the fight in Ukraine are mindful of this possibility and how serious it would be if it were to occur?
Thank you, Senator. Of course, first of all, just with the general statement, my colleagues, my interlocutors in Ukraine assure me that they understand how important this issue is to the American people, and I believe sincerely so. But as usual, military people put into action systems to try to verify things. So we're doing enhanced end-use monitoring, and if you would permit me, I'd like to describe that for you for a second.
Please do, yes.
The first thing we do is whenever we receive U.S. equipment that's going to go into the country, it comes through one of a couple of ports of entry. The main one is in southeastern Poland, and a number of the members have visited there. At that location, we inventory everything by serial number so that we know exactly what's going into the country. A couple of months ago, about 6 months ago, we gave the Ukrainian military a NATO standard logistics tracking software system called LogFast. It's what we use to track our own system. So we ingest all of that inventory into LogFast, and then the Ukrainians use that to track and to distribute their equipment around the country, and we have access to that in real time. So that helps us to a certain degree. But then, of course, once you get inside the country, we have a responsibility to go lay eyes on things and check them. And that enhanced end-use monitoring is done by the Defense Attaché Office in Kiev, led by Brigadier General Garrick Harmon. They go out to sites and they inspect. They went to Odessa yesterday to inspect and to inventory, and they'll go to another location next week as well. When they can't get to a location, they have barcodes placed on things, and Ukrainians self-report by clicking on the barcode, and then we ingest that information into LogFast so we can track it as well.
Okay, perhaps you could supplement that answer on the record, but you have confidence that there are safeguards for our weapons and donations.
Yes, I do, Senator.
General Van Ovost, we're not where we need to be at all in the Pacific if conflict breaks out there, aren't we?
Senator, we are not yet fully set in posture in the Indo-Pacific, I would agree.
And you mentioned on page 15 of your testimony, in particular, the importance of the tanker security program, and in your verbal testimony, you mentioned the importance of the Jones Act. Now, we're aware that in some circumstances, the consumers pay more because of the Jones Act. But in a previous conversation with you, you were, I believe, very compelling in explaining why the Jones Act is so important to our national security in case conflict breaks out. So if I might, Mr. Chairman, let General Van Ovost expand on that.
Certainly, Senator, thank you. The United States, we only have 85 U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed ships in international trade right now, which we have less than 2% of the foreign trade that passes using U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed ships. In other words, 98% foreign flagged. It's not enough for our national security. So we have actually a ready reserve force because there's not enough U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed shipping. So it's very important that we have maritime security program, tanker security program, cargo preference laws, and the Jones Act to ensure that we keep U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed vessels available for our national security needs.
And what if we didn't have those?
Senator, if we didn't have those, we perhaps would have to grow our organic fleet of sea lift ships, requiring 100% of the burden being on the U.S. military.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member, Senator Fisher, please.
Shaheen.
Shaheen, I am.
You know, I know we all look alike, but
No, Roger does not look at all like. It's just.
Like a chairman, perhaps?
No, it's just, I apologize. It's early and my coffee has not yet taken hold. Forgive me. Senator Shaheen of New Hampshire.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, General Cavoli and General Van Ovost, for being here this morning and for your service. General Van Ovost, I would like to begin with you because in your opening statement you talked about the stressed capacity of our air refueling and the importance of that. And I know we've been delighted to host you at the former Pease Air Force Base, where Pease Air National Guard 157th Air Refueling Wing has KC-46 tankers to do refueling. But can you talk about, when you talked about the stressed capacity, how important the KC-46 is and what else we need to do in order to address our needs?
Senator, thank you. As I mentioned, our ability to project and sustain the force, the foundation of that is our air refueling capability. It makes us a global superpower. So it's really critical that we continue to recapitalize the KC-135s and KC-10s with KC-46. So I appreciate this committee's support in continuing that recap and thinking about the next generation air refueling. As far as the KC-46, it brings new capabilities to the fight, capabilities we have not had previously. That aircraft is what I call connected to the battle space. It can see battle space maneuvers, and it can assist the joint force in ways that we haven't even fully explored yet. So it's a force multiplier. It can do probe and drogue as well as boom refueling. And it can receive and it can take on gas in flight. So it's a multi-capable airplane, and we intend to use it that way to augment the joint force.
Thank you. You also talked about the importance of Section 702 in terms of intelligence gathering. Senator Budd and I were with a number of other senators in Latin America a couple of weeks ago, and at every stop we heard about the importance of reauthorizing 702. Can you and General Cavoli both speak to what that allows us to do when we don't have people on the ground in terms of collecting information that we need?
As Senator, signals intelligence is critical to my ability to understand the threats around the world, where they're moving to, what their intentions are, and how we can mitigate those threats. So that's it for the open session. Happy to expound in the classified section.
Thank you.
Senator, of course, a full answer is best done in closed session, but I can assure you that an enormous amount of the intelligence that I rely on in the current crisis is derived from the authorities under 702.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think, General Cavoli, this question is probably for you because we see Iran continuing to supply Russia with critical support in this war against Ukraine. There are reports now that Iran is providing artillery and ammunition to Ukraine as well as drones. Has that been confirmed, and how are we working with our counterparts in CENTCOM to track and respond to that Iranian equipment? And also, are we seeing other countries provide weapons and ammunition to Russia as well?
First, more broadly, Senator, we see other countries considering it. We see precious few actually doing it right now, and we're gratified by that, but it's because of significant efforts on the part of the United States and our allies to discourage them. And you've seen some of that in the open press. We can discuss some more in closed session. With regard to the Iranian threat, specifically, we have seen, and the Ukrainians have reported to us, the presence of Iranian drones, especially. That's been pretty well covered in open sources, but I can go into some details in closed session with you if you'd like. I am in significant contact with my good friend and colleague Eric Corella in Central Command, and some of the things we're thinking about in terms of handling this situation, I can address with you in closed session as well, if you'll permit me.
Well, thank you, and you may want to address this in closed session, but do we think they have an unlimited supply of the weapons that they're providing to Russia, or are we seeing challenges within their industrial base?
They have a significant supply, but it's certainly not unlimited, ma'am.
Thank you. And I have only a little time left, but could you both of you speak to the importance of the air defender exercises that NATO is going to be doing? Again, I'm pleased that the 157th from New Hampshire is going to participate in those, but how important are those? I understand it's the biggest exercise, that air exercise NATO's done.
If I could start as the commander of Allied Command Operations, Senator, extremely important. Air defense is one of the things that most of the nations in the alliance are challenged on in terms of capacity. And then the integration is something that has to be done and repetitively exercised constantly because systems change and the technology gets updated and the software, and then you got to bring it back together. These are absolutely vital exercises.
And our teams are fully engaged. This is a critical exercise for us for interoperability with our allies and partners, growing their capabilities, and including command and control.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Cavoli, what do you assess to be the impact of Russia's assertions that it would deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, along with its handling over Iskander mobile short-range ballistic missiles to the Belarusian forces?
Senator, thank you for the question. As a military matter, I do not think that it is a particularly concerning development. And we can go into the specifics of that in closed session, of course. Therefore, I think it's mainly a gesture. And,
you think it's more sable rattling again?
I do. I think it's a gesture, and it's a gesture that we'll handle through our policy means, et cetera. And I have less to comment on in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Also, can you discuss what your demands are for both manned and unmanned ISR?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. Of course, like all the combatant commanders, ISR is what we depend on, especially during peacetime, to maintain situational awareness. There is a demand for ISR, both manned and unmanned aerial ISR, that far exceeds the supply across the Department of Defense, and we're grateful when we get our share of it. Right now, it's extremely important for a variety of reasons. We can't do everything with other means. It's our ability to collect and analyze depends on using a layered approach with a variety of systems, and we depend on those. We're grateful for the advances that the services are making, from the Army with its new Artemis system, which has been doing great work in Europe for the last couple of years, to the Air Force's advances and to the Navy's P-8 program, all very valuable, ma'am.
And how do you believe the threats are going to change in Yukon in the coming decades? In your crystal ball, what do you see?
Do you mean in general, Senator?
In general.
Well, I think Russia is quite likely to remain the core security challenge in Europe for some years to come. Their military has suffered significant losses in this conflict, but they've mainly been in the ground domain. The Air Force, the tactical Air Force, has lost about 80 fighters and fighter bombers, but they have more than 1,000 of them left. The long-range aviation has not been touched. The Navy has barely been touched, lost a ship or two. The strategic nuclear forces, the cyber, the space have not been touched. So I think Russia will continue to be the core security challenge. But there are others. China is gaining influence, and China continues to press for influence. And then there's always instability in the Balkans. You know, we're not done with that. So I think perhaps we'll see more of the same, Senator.
You brought up where Russia hasn't touched many of their capabilities currently, and so they have those in reserve for the next decade. When we look at munitions that are being used, especially in the conflict in Ukraine, and the amount of munitions that are being expended, do you think that we need to increase our production capacity here in this country? And do you encourage our allies to do the same?
Absolutely, Senator, to both. Our allies are very aware of the shortfalls that they have in munitions in certain cases where they do exist.
You were talking about the number of tanks and that our allies have already shared with the Ukrainians.
Right, and so inside NATO, in my role as the Supreme Allied Commander, I've been responsible to deliver a new set of operational plans, and we turned them in on the 14th of April. They're very specific regional plans for collective defense, and they have a level of specificity that's going to drive a force structure requirement, which will be the first time in 35 years that the alliance has a plans-based force structure requirement. This will guide national defense investments across the alliance.
Thank you. General Van Ovost, you talked a little bit about the sea lift and being able to fuel, have that fueling capability. And you mentioned, working with MARAD. Can you kind of focus in, especially on the MARAD point there, on how important that is?
Sure, Senator. We have a great relationship with the Maritime Administration, who oversees our ready reserve force, those ships that are in reduced operating status. And when we need to activate them, they wake up and they come to Transcom and we fight them. So it's really important that we keep that relationship going, and especially when it comes to our mariners, because the same mariners that crew ships that do foreign import and export, they're also the same mariners that are on our gray hull ships. So it's really important that we continue to support them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Fisher. Senator Rono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. General Cavoli, China is sending a special representative, an envoy to Ukraine and other countries for talks on regulating the Ukrainian crisis. Not sure what that means. And the special envoy has been selected, and Ukraine is sending a special envoy to China. Do you consider this a significant development, and what does it portend?
Thank you, Senator. I'm not sure we know yet the significance of the development, but what we do know is that China should begin by condemning Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. that should be the first step in my mind to any productive role for China in the conflict or its resolution, ma'am.
I think that, yes, well, this also signifies China's engagement in Europe. And so I think that it remains to be seen, but to me, it is possibly a positive sign that perhaps there will be an end to this terrible conflict. General Van Ovost, we have spoken at length about Red Hill and your plan for the fuel currently stored there. I understand there is a plan for where the fuel will go once defueling begins, and with over half the required repairs at Red Hill complete, defueling remains on track to be completed in June of 2024. Is your plan for fuel distribution in the Pacific complete?
Senator, we're lockstep with INDOPACOM and the Navy Task Force Commander on the defueling of Red Hill. We have assets ready to support, and we are on track to meet all of their needs. The posture in the Indo-Pacific is still under assessment. We are in our role as the Global Bulk Fuel Manager for the Department of Defense. We are looking very closely at the posture requirements, the requirements to ensure that we can buy fuel or store fuel, and also what needs to be afloat and what should be in various areas. So we are still doing that assessment. We are working with INDOPACOM on the Section 333 report that should highlight the key aspects of that posture.
So as you're assessing how you're going to complete the safe defueling of the 100 million gallons or so that is at Red Hill, if you require anything further at this time to ensure that the defueling happens in the way that we would want it to happen, will you let me and this committee know? General Cavoli, in war, it is often the most vulnerable who pay the highest cost, the elderly, women, girls. While it is vital that we continue to provide Ukraine with the military equipment, it needs to continue to bulwark democracy in Europe. Our support of the civilian population also speaks to our country's values and stand in sharp contrast with Russia and other malign actors. What is EUCOM doing to support and protect the people of Ukraine, and how is EUCOM working with Ukraine and other U.S. government agencies to monitor human rights abuses by Russia?
Thank you, Senator. First of all, we support NATO's and other European efforts in this regard. The first one, of course, was the acceptance by our allies of large numbers of refugees who were in the main women and children. They have very successfully done that, and they did it spontaneously. Our initial thought was we were going to have to help significantly, but the societies absorbed them. As they've done so, we've worked with them carefully through non-DOD entities, but advised by EUCOM and participated by EUCOM to make sure that rights are established. And then as we talk to our Ukrainian colleagues, we do keep our gender advisors and everybody involved as we develop plans with them. The Ukrainians are remarkably sensitive to civilian casualties, of course, because those are Ukrainian civilians who will be inadvertently wounded in their operations. And we routinely in exercises hear even junior Ukrainian servicemen saying, hey, wait a minute, I know people in that town. What are we going to do about this? So it's a complex question, man, but those are some of the things that we're doing to help. We do provide support to those organizations that are attempting to figure out war crimes as well, although we have not put people on the ground to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you both for your service and your appearance today. General Cavoli, you testified earlier that 31 Abrams tanks would arrive in Ukraine later in the year. Estimates I've seen say that we're still about 8 months away from that. Is that correct?
No, Senator. The first thing we're going to do is put a training set in.
That starts next month in Grafenware, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And then the next set, the dates are moving right now. We're trying to accelerate as much as we can. It'll probably
Are the same tanks at Grafenware going to be the tanks that go to Ukraine?
The first set will not. Those will be training tanks that we keep, and then we'll send a different set in. We did the same thing with Bradley's earlier this year, sir.
Okay. General Van Ovost, have you received an order to transport that second set of tanks to Ukraine yet?
General Cotton and I work very closely with European Command to meet all of their requirements in a priority manner. Certainly, we are in coordination on the tanks as well as all the other significant equipment.
Is that a no?
We anticipate the movement, so from an order perspective, we're ready to move it.
Sounds like a no. General Cavoli, you look like you have something to say here.
My command has not issued a specific date for movement for those yet. As soon as we have the exact sourcing pinned down with the timeline, we will issue the actual order for the aircraft.
Why has your command not issued that order?
You know, can I take that for the record, Mr. Cotton? Because I'd like to give you the exact status of it.
I mean, our country has thousands of main battle tanks. It would seem like it's not that hard to find 31 and get them there.
Senator, some of the reasons for that I could cover in closed session, but if I could.
I guess, but I mean, I think the main reason for that is the main reasons why we didn't even agree to supply the tanks for a year, which is that President Biden didn't want to supply them. And again, I think we could supply them faster than 8 or 9 months if there was the political will. This is not a decision for you or General Van Ovost to make. I think it's just reflected from the political decision to continue to drag our feet in what we're supplying to Ukraine. It's just a repeated story we've seen over and over again throughout the course of this war. I want to get to one of the potential reasons for that as well. You talked earlier about submitting new O-plans for NATO. It came to my attention earlier this year that we have not changed our O-plans or our warfighting requirements in EUCOM for Russia. Is that correct?
Senator, I'm in consultation with the Secretary of Defense on that question right now. The question has been posed to me, and we're working our answer with the staff. I believe I have a date with the Secretary of Defense later this month or next month to discuss it in detail and to come to a conclusion on what timeline we will or will not adjust plans.
So that's a no then. Once again, that's a no. We haven't changed our requirements in the O-plan to fight Russia.
Could we discuss exactly what we've done with those plans in closed session, sir?
Again, we can, but I think the question has been answered now. And the reason I highlight it is the committee is continuously told that by the administration, not by uniformed military officers, that we can't provide this, that, or the other weapon to Ukraine because we need it for our own requirements. I understand that, special requirements in the Western Pacific against China. But if we still have the same requirements in place to fight Russia in April of 2023 that we had in February of 2022, after we've seen the performance of their military in Ukraine and after the known degradation of their military in Ukraine, then I think that's just a pretext that the administration is using for not supplying more capabilities to Ukraine. We can get into more detail in closed setting, but I think it's very troubling that the administration is still stuck in the pre-Ukraine war mindset of what it would take for us to adequately deter or defeat Russia in a conflict in EUCOM. One final point I want to raise is the flying of our MQ-9 drones in the Black Sea. Russia dangerously downed one a few weeks back. The reports I've seen and what I've heard from my sources is that we have now altered our flight patterns in the Black Sea, that we are no longer flying in the same airspace where we were flying before that negligent incident with the Russian aircraft. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator. So it was not just negligent; it was not competent. The Russian pilot bumped into the MQ-9, which is not something pilots typically do on purpose. Again, on ISR operations, especially in the Black Sea, I'd be delighted to answer you in detail in closed session.
Well, I asked the Secretary of Defense this recently, and he repeatedly said, "We will fly the paths we feel necessary to collect intelligence information."
And those have been his instructions to me.
I understand that, but again, that's not a no when I was asking him that. To me, that's him saying we're not flying where we were anymore because we don't want to be provocative, which again is a political decision. It's not a military decision. And this is not some secret. I mean, Russia knows where we're flying these aircraft. Like, anybody here could find out where we're flying them for the most part just by going on open source information. And the fact that if we were flying those aircraft in certain airspace in the Black Sea before that incident, because that's where we thought we needed to get intelligence, and now we're saying we can get that intelligence by flying them somewhere else where we shouldn't have been flying them there in the first place. But if we needed to get them there to get that intelligence in the first place, then we should be back there. Otherwise, we're simply ceding that airspace to Russia. So my time's expired. I guess we'll address more of these in a closed setting.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Gillibrand, please.
General Cavoli, last year we passed the Justice for Victims of War Crimes Act, improving the Department of Justice's ability to prosecute war crimes committed in Ukraine. However, prosecutors, whether in the U.S. or in an international tribunal, cannot proceed with cases without evidence. How is EUCOM working with Ukraine and with our allies to preserve evidence of war crimes? If your personnel discover evidence of a war crime through classified systems, are you ensuring that the evidence is flagged for declassification and eventual use by prosecutors?
Senator, thank you. So we don't have the lead on this question, on this initiative, obviously, but we do support it as requested. And when we find evidence of war crimes, whether in open sources or any other way, we do refer those and we do keep track of it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. The war in Ukraine has allowed the world to observe wartime operations in the cyber and space domains. As a combatant commander in the theater where this conflict is occurring, what have you learned from the conflict about the employment of military forces in the cyber and space domains?
We've learned a ton, both in terms of adversary capability and capacity, Senator, as well as our defensive needs. We're working hard to improve where we need to improve. Most of all, we're working to help our allies defend their networks and to help our partners who are vulnerable also to defend their networks. And we have a very tight cooperation with Paul Nakasone and his U.S. Cyber Command to do this. There are some specific things, of course, that at a classified level would be interesting to talk about. But in general, we have seen a significant employment of cyber, both inside the conflict zone and outside the conflict zone on the part of our adversaries, ma'am.
General Van Ovost, Transcom is turning over responsibility for service members' permanent change of station moves to a private contractor. How will the department ensure that service members' experience actually improves under this contract? How does the department intend to respond if military families' experience worsen rather than improve?
Senator, thanks for that question. We are focused on delivering the quality service, transparency, and accountability that is not existent in the current series of contracts. So we are partnering with HomeSafe, and we have a measured phase-in plan with 28 separate metrics monthly that we'll be reviewing, for which we own the data. So we are going to continue to watch them as they bring on the capacity, as they begin right after peak season, September 23. And we have a spouses group where we are getting feedback from, actively seeking from them their experiences. So, and our first sample rate is going to be about 50%. So we are going to definitely be understanding how they're bringing on the capacity and are they delivering on the quality that we desire.
Thank you. Part of your strategy for Transcom has involved the increased use of commercial contracts for defense missions rather than military aircraft and crews. Can you discuss how you are ensuring that these contracts are implementing appropriate and aggressive cybersecurity protocols? How are you including cybersecurity in these contracts, and how are you verifying that these contractors are not endangering the security of our military personnel or allies?
Senator, cyber is a consistent discussion point amongst us and our contract or transportation service providers. We are collaborating with industry. We have contract cybersecurity standards to safeguard defense information in those contracts. They annually assess them, and we review those assessments. And we are working throughout the department with Paul Nakasone on sharing and collaboration initiatives with our industry partners, and I appreciate Congress's support of the no-cost cybersecurity offerings offered in the Cyber Collaboration Center and the Defense Industrial-Based Cyber Security Program. Our transportation service providers are taking advantage of these, and we are assessing them almost constantly.
General Cavoli, following up on Senator Shaheen's question and Senator Hirono's question about Iran and China, can you talk a little bit more about what the impact of Iranian involvement and Chinese involvement in the conflict create, and what recommendations you have to the administration?
Yes, ma'am. So the first complication is diplomatic and political, right? The fact that they don't condemn, the fact that in some cases they affirm Russia's position. Second, Iran, as we noted a few minutes ago, has provided some material support, specifically drones. Those have had an effect. Those do two things. First, when they succeed, they strike targets. And second, they have to be countered, and sometimes they're countered with air defense missiles. And as Chairman Milley and Secretary Austin have made very plain, the primary requirement the Ukrainians have right now is ground-based air defense to control their skies. So it's a cost imposition strategy that you can go after with that. Chinese aid has been non-material. It has not had a direct physical effect on the battlefield yet, ma'am.
Any other impact non-material?
In closed session, I could discuss one specific one, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for your service to our country and to your families as well. And thank you also for your teams that are with you today and their families as well for their service to our country. I just want to follow up a little bit. The line of questioning that Senator Cotton began here is one that I think I'd like to understand a little bit more clearly. I believe there were 31 Abrams tanks that were committed to by our country to Ukraine's defense. Are those in that 31? Or do those include the training tanks that are already in Europe today?
Senator, there will be 31 Abrams as of right now donated to Ukraine. The training set will be a separate set.
Okay, and so you've got some there in Europe right now. Do you have the 31 identified as being already in Europe, or are they in the United States?
Senator, if I could, I'd like to take that for the record so I can give you the exact location.
Well, I don't need the exact location. I was just curious if they were within your area of operation today in Europe.
Senator, again, I would want to give you an accurate answer, and I don't have it off the top of my head, sir.
It would seem to me that if we've committed for those tanks to be made available, what's the length of time from when you're notified that it's time to deliver them? How long does that take? And perhaps this is a better question for General Van Ovost. How long does it take to actually deliver the Abrams tanks once you've been notified or requested to deliver them?
Senator, we have multiple avenues to deliver Abrams tanks by air or by sea. So we consistently look not just at Abrams tanks, but the significant amount of aid that's being provided to Ukraine. We source that from around the globe, not necessarily just out of CONUS or just out of Europe. And as we determine where the sourcings are going to be, we match it to the best resource to move it to meet the timelines as needed by the priorities set out by the European Commission.
So you're prepared to make that move as expeditiously as possible once you've been given the orders to transport the tanks?
Yes, Senator.
Where would those tanks be located at today if you were to do them? Can you share that in an open session?
Senator, again, I don't know where all the tanks are and which ones would be viable for this donation. I would leave that up to Army Material Command. And
so it hasn't gotten that far yet?
Not to my awareness it's gotten that far.
All right, thank you. And General, once again, the orders, or at least your authorizations to move tanks over, you'll play a part in that, but you have not been given the authorizations yet to do that at this time.
Right, when the exact tanks are identified and their locations, so they could come from stocks in Europe, as General Van Ovost just pointed out, they could be reconstructed. When I've got the set identified, then I place an order with General Van Ovost, and it usually goes fairly quickly, sir. They can be moved by air or better by sea lift.
I think it's fair to say that we probably have the best logistics capabilities of any country in the world. And that's a testament not just to the men and women that serve within that, but also because we do a good job of planning. I think the reason why I'm following up on this, and I recognize this is not a line of questioning that you really want to go down, but I think it's important to point out that this is not a case of where we just simply can't deliver 31 Abrams tanks. The bottom line is that this has been a policy decision that they're not prepared to deliver 31 Abrams tanks at this time. It is not within your authorization. General, would that be a correct statement on my part?
Senator, there is an intention to deliver the 31 tanks. I think there are some technical things that we have to go through in terms of exactly which tanks that we're working on.
But the bottom line is if we needed those tanks, it shouldn't take 8 months for the United States Army to be able to access 31 Abrams tanks. If we needed them tomorrow, we'd get them very, very quickly. If you needed them, you could get them. Or if you were authorized to get them, you could get them. This is not a case of us not being able to get them. It's a matter that somebody's got to make a decision on when they want those tanks delivered. Is that a fair statement, General?
Sir, I think the key is exactly which tanks and which capabilities, and there are levels of classification that the Army has to wade through on that question for releasability, sir.
Fair to say, though, sir, that should never take 9 months. If you needed those tanks, you could get those tanks.
Sir, if I needed those tanks for the U.S. Army, I certainly could.
Yeah, okay. That is very helpful. Thank you, General. I recognize this was not the line of questioning that I wanted to go down today, but this, I think, is important to understand that those decisions need to be made and that this is not within your area of operation. You're ready to go. You can get it done, but someone's got to tell you it's time to go. And I want to thank you for those very frank answers. I'm mindful that my time is expiring, but I just have to also say, I want to take a moment just to thank you and your staff for resolving an issue that the South Dakota Army National Guard's 129th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment had in getting its meals paid for while deployed in support of Atlantic Resolve. It takes a total force to defend the nation. The Guard is a key component to that force, but sometimes the pieces just simply don't fit together very well. And I want to thank you for going the extra mile to take care of these soldiers, even while tending to the strategic issues that you are responsible for, and I wanted to publicly say thank you for getting involved in getting that fixed for these young soldiers. Thank you,
Senator, my commander was wrong in that case, and we appreciate your care for your constituents and for bringing it to our attention, and we're rectifying it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here today. I have a question for each of you. First, I want to start with General Van Ovost on the tanker recapitalization plan. The Air Force has modified this approach in order to accelerate the next generation air refueling system, NGAS, and having a modern and survivable tanker plan is critical to any future fight. It's also part of strategic deterrence. And as you know, the Arizona National Guard provides a significant amount of support for rapid mobilization, worldwide deployment, airlift, aeromedical evacuation, and sustained aerial refueling operations for both our air forces and the Navy and partner nation air forces. The 161st Air Refueling Wings fleet is now more than 50 years old, and it remains in really high demand. So, General, what can you share about the Air Force's plan to recapitalize Arizona's National Guard tanker mission, as well as the other Air National Guard units supporting this mission across the country? And what I'm getting at is, what's the plan here, and for Arizona specifically, to get either a KC-Y bridge recapitalization tanker or to continue with the KC-46 until NGAS comes online?
Senator, thanks for that question. Our ability to project and sustain the joint force without fail is a deterrent to our aggressors, and it assures our allies and partners we will be there. And air refueling is the backbone to that. Along those lines, thank you for your support. The total force, we could not do our job in logistics and mobility without the total force, the strength of the total force. I use them every day, so I thank them for their service. As far as the recapitalization, as we work with the Secretary of the Air Force staff, they are committed to a continuous recapitalization program, because when we get the last KC-46 on the current contract, the 179th aircraft, we will still have 287 67-year-old KC-135s. So they have committed to a very targeted modernization program for the KC-135s, which need to last us out into the 2040s, to ensure the safety of the airplanes and the survivability of those airplanes out into the future. Meanwhile, they've committed to a continuous recapitalization program with capabilities that are relevant to the KC-46 Block 1, because as they accelerate next generation air refueling system to the left to the mid-2030s, we'll have a gap of 6 or 7 years there where we won't have any production airplanes. So I look forward to their plan. They're doing an analysis of alternatives. I'm looking forward to their plan to continue to seed and recapitalize with all of our air refueling units, because in the end, all of those KC-135s need to be recapitalized.
Okay, could I get your commitment to work with me to ensure that the Guard will receive modernized tankers in a timely fashion comparable with active duty units?
Yes, Senator, I'll work with you and the Air Force on that.
Thank you. Thank you. General Cavoli, it's good seeing you again. We met in Munich, and I just got back from Kyiv a couple weeks ago, met with President Zelensky for over an hour. We had a very productive talk about what he thinks he needs to defeat Russia. And I'm more than ever committed to support Ukraine. We can't let Russia win this thing. You know, last week, Congress was notified of a presidential drawdown authority for more HIMARS, 155-millimeter artillery rounds, and a series of other equipment. And but just for me to get to the point here, in your military assessment, is the equipment that the U.S. and our partners providing enough to pave the way for a decisive victory against the Russians by Ukraine?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the notes on your recent trip to Kyiv as well. They were very helpful to me. So we went into a planning process with our Ukrainian colleagues last winter, and we developed with them a number of courses of action, wargamed them carefully, and when we came down to the key courses of action for an offensive, we calculated the amount of equipment and the various types that they required, and we have fulfilled that. We have nearly gotten everything into Ukraine, and I am confident they have what they need for the offensive that we have planned with them. And I can go into significant detail in a closed session with you, sir.
Okay, we'll pick it up then. Thank you. Thank you, General.
To it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for, or excuse me, ma'am. Thank you, sir, General Cavoli, for being here today, and General Van Ovost. Thank you very much, ma'am, for coming in front of the committee today. I'm going to start with you, General Cavoli, and a number of my colleagues have raised the issue of Ukraine and Russia, and what we hear in the news, and this has been a hot-button topic with the administration as well, is that we're afraid of escalation. As the war continues to go on, will escalate, Russia will escalate. So General Cavoli, how do you assess the prospect, the prospect of Russia escalating to a point of a nuclear weapons use in this conflict? Can you talk in open session just broadly about what you see, what you've heard, and what would be that tipping point for Vladimir Putin?
Thank you, Senator. It's nice to see you again. And Of course, this is a complicated and difficult question. There are an enormous variety of things that go into successful deterrence and successful escalation management. It is something we work on every single day. I am in constant communication with the department, as well as my subordinate commands, as well as our allies, in terms of what we're doing, where we're located, what's happening inside of Ukraine, what's happening outside of Ukraine, to include with my fellow combatant commanders, many of whom have Russian presence in their AORs as well. Successful so far, right? We have managed to control every incident to the extent possible, and I think that's due to a lot of hard work and learning as we go along. With regard to nuclear escalation specifically, ma'am, that's very difficult to talk about in an open session, but I have traveled back to the United States to deliver testimony, so I obviously have a certain degree of confidence that we, the United States and the alliance, are in a good, strong position and deterring such things.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and we hope that we continue on a strong path of deterrence in that area. And with the other assessments out there of President Zelensky's wishes to not only expel the Russians from eastern Ukraine, but also to retake Crimea. What is your assessment of their ability to retake Crimea, and what would the posture be coming from the United States and our partners and allies?
Thanks. The question of retaking any specific piece of ground, depends on a variety of things. Crimea is pretty tough. Crimea's got a mountainous center. But of course, Crimea is pretty hard to keep resupplied if you're the adversary as well. So it really depends on the situation at the time. If Crimea were empty of Russian soldiers, it would be easy. If Crimea were defended at a certain level, it would be harder. And it's hard to see where things go. What we do know is that any such question would be answered sequentially with the activities after the activities that the Ukrainians are planning to undertake in the next months. So it's hard to say from here.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as we look to the future, and I know we don't know when this conflict will end, we hope it would be soon. But General Cavoli, would NATO's military requirements in EUCOM increase if there is a political decision to extend a security commitment to Ukraine?
So our posture, the U.S. posture, has shifted over time. Of course, ma'am, in the initial phases, we went up about 103,000 uniform. We've adjusted that over time. We're at about 82,000 in uniform right now, and that depends on what we see going in the AOR, and it's a constant back and forth with the department and the situation. If we were to extend some form of security guarantee to Ukraine, it would clearly depend on exactly what the nature of the security guarantee was. It would also depend, importantly, on what approach our allies took to that. Our allies are increasing their defense commitments. Many of our eastern flank allies, such as Poland, have made massive investments, 3.94% of GDP right now, which exceeds U.S. expenditures on defense. So it depends on what role they would take as well, and that would certainly be our choice, our preference, to have them lead in such a situation.
And I see that my time is expiring, but part of that equation as well, I would like to discuss further at another time, but our continued participation in the state partnership program, especially with a number of our European partners. Obviously, Iowa is partnered with Kosovo. There's a lot of concern with some of those nations as well with Russian influence. So I think they can be an extremely important part of that solution.
Ma'am, I am the biggest fan of the state partnership program.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Ernst. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here and for your extraordinary service to our nation, and to each of your teams, some of them behind you, my thanks as well. General Cavoli, I've been to Ukraine 3 times over roughly the last year plus. I've also, by the way, visited the training area in Grafenwehr And I have been just immensely impressed, not only by President Zelensky on the 3 occasions that I've spent time with him and everyday Ukrainians, but his military team and our team training Ukrainians, their dedication, their bonding, in fact, in providing the hands-on skill they need to operate the Bradley and Stryker vehicles. I think it's a great tribute to our military that we have committed in the way that we have, not just at the 30,000-foot level, but literally person to person, hands-on in the way that we have. I'm deeply troubled as I view the assets they have and the assets that we could provide. You've just testified in response to Senator Kelly that your belief is that they have what they need to be successful in the counteroffensive this spring in the South and in the East. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
Our mantra is that we never want to see a fair fight. Do they have what they need to have an unfair advantage in this offensive going forward?
Sir, they have to be better than the Russian force they face, and there are great weaknesses in the Russian force they face right now. Those weaknesses are temporary, and the Russians will improve their posture and their capabilities over time. But time and the enemies, the Ukrainians' enemies' capabilities is an important factor in this. And
don't they need more?
I believe that they will have what they need.
Sorry to interrupt. Don't they need more air defense? Couldn't they use planes? What about more of the armored vehicles, even more tanks? Where would you assess the platforms that we can do more to provide to give them greater strength at this critical moment? Because I assume you agree that if this counteroffensive is unsuccessful, it will be a significant setback for the Ukrainians.
Sir, yeah, of course, there are things we continue to give them and that we will need to continue to give them over time. I may have mischaracterized things. We haven't delivered a force and then that's it. We continue to build with them, and we have plans to continue to build with them over the summer and into the autumn, and then eventually we intend to help them restructure their entire military. In the short term, ground-based air defense remains important. We've made some important advances in the last couple of months. I could be very specific about them in closed session, of course, sir, but I feel pretty comfortable about where we are, and I'm comfortable about where we're going in the next couple of months, sir.
What about
an Army can always use more.
Understood. What about planes? What's your assessment?
Sir, they've just received a bunch of MiG-29s from 2 of our allies. They've begun to employ some of those MiG-29s. They have a few dozen aircraft right now. They are conducting offensive as well as defensive operations with them right now. I think they're key to controlling their own airspace right now, however, is ground-based air defense, as you pointed out a minute ago, sir.
The Washington Post reported yesterday that leaked United States intelligence indicated that the Russians can fund the war in Ukraine for at least another year. Do you agree with that assessment?
Sir, I can't talk specifically to the undisclosed, to the unauthorized disclosures. Clearly, there are investigations going on and everything like that. However, it's important to note that, as General Milley has said on a number of occasions, the Russians have strategic depth. That they have manpower, and that they are not to be underestimated in terms of their ability to endure.
So you don't disagree with the conclusion that they could fund the war for another year, which again heightens the importance of the counteroffensive?
As completely separate from what may or may not be in any documents, and
right.
I haven't seen. Yeah, no, I think they can fund for another year, sir.
And one last question, sir. Just following up on Senator Cotton's question, you may not be aware, but 4 of us wrote to the Secretary of Defense on March 21, asking that our warfighting requirements in Europe be updated to reflect the degradation of Russian forces, 200,000 or more of their troops killed, significant damage to their armored vehicles and so forth, because obviously it's a different force than it was when those warfighting requirements were devised. Putting aside the timing, wouldn't you agree in your professional capacity that those warfighting requirements do have to be updated?
Absolutely, when we can assess the exact status, Senator, of the capabilities, the capacity, and the disposition of whatever Russian army emerges from this, absolutely we'll update that stuff. And I'm in contact, as I mentioned to Senator Cotton a moment ago, with the department about this. I would point out one or two things, though. You know, the Russian army inside Ukraine today is bigger than it was at the beginning of the conflict. So we have to make sure we got the right side picture, and that's what I'm working on. Separately, sir, I thank you for your visits to Grafenwehr and your kind words about our soldiers and our NCOs who are absolutely putting the ball over the left field fence every day. All components, all three components every day, and I invite all members to please come visit those soldiers at Grafenwehr and see what they're doing for our country.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Scott, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. Thank each of you for being here. Thank you for what you do. I just had the opportunity to go to Greece and Cyprus a couple weeks ago, and that was with Admiral Sharetta and some other sailors. And you really have to admire what people are doing. Could you talk about, General, can you talk about the importance of Cyprus and the importance of making sure we continue to allow them to get the military equipment that they need?
The Eastern Mediterranean in general, Senator, thank you for bringing it up. It's a complicated area, and it's an area that has seen greatly increased competition as well as Russian naval presence in the past few years. You know, the establishment of the naval base in Tartus has been an important part of that. In my NATO role, we devote a lot of attention to that. And we have a couple of operations, maritime operations and air operations, that help us with that. And in my U.S. role, Naval Forces Europe work extensively down there. One of our requirements is to be able to project power into the Eastern Med, and Cyprus is ideally located to do that, as you know, and does figure into some of our thoughts in that regard. We keep a strong military-to-military relationship with Cyprus, sir.
And Cyprus, it's in our best interest if Cyprus continues to buy American equipment rather than rely on Chinese or Russian equipment.
Sir, American equipment, sharing an equipment set with another nation creates a strategic bond as well as a practical bond that is very useful.
I want to thank you and everybody in Europe for all their efforts to make sure Ukraine wins. If you were talking to just somebody that's not very political, doesn't really think about geopolitics, what would you tell them is the reason why we ought to be involved in the Ukraine war with and all the help we give them? What would your pitch be? I mean, just think about it for a second. Americans are saying we've spent, I think we've committed, $100 billion plus to this, and that's clearly a lot of money. So, what would you say to people?
Sir, thank you for the incredibly important question. Right, the first thing I would tell just one of my cousins or something like that is that America does not like bullies, and having bullies around does not help America. And that's step one, and Russia is a bully, and we need to deal with that. We need to help those who stand up to bullies to deal with that. Second, the United States doesn't let adversaries control things that are valuable to us. And that part of Europe is valuable to us, and so is Europe in general. And if Ukraine loses, then more at Europe is in stake, and we don't let that happen. And then finally, I'd say, just in a self-interest sense, when I was a lieutenant and came in the Army in the 1980s, we had more than 300,000 U.S. service people stationed overseas because of Russia, because of the Soviet threat, and we don't need to return to that. We don't need to return to that. And so Ukraine deserves help, so we don't have to.
General, when you look at, like on this chart, you see where your troops or your servicemen and women are stationed. Is there any logic to moving more people out of places like Italy and Germany closer to where there's more risk?
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, of course there is, and we've done that as the risk has gone up. We've shifted forces on temporary deployments out to the east, and all of the reinforcements just about that have come in have gone out to the east. Moreover, in the past year, the department has announced the intent to station some new organizations in Europe. The 5th Corps headquarters Ford is in Poland. A new special logistics base has gone straight into Poland. We have shifted a combat aviation brigade on rotation out to Poland. We have a permanent rotation. We have an enduring rotational presence in each of the 3 Baltics. We have a division headquarters and a brigade combat team in Romania. So we've done a significant shift to the east. The forces that are left in places like Italy and Germany are well positioned for deployment to reinforce the correct location. They got good readiness facilities, training facilities and stuff, and they have good infrastructure for deployment. So they give us flexibility as we go forward, sir.
Thank both of you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator King, please.
Senator Scott, when people ask me that question, why are we there, my short answer is Google's Sudetenland, 1938. Hitler could have been stopped and 55 million lives could have been saved. To me, that's the most compelling argument. If Putin is successful in Ukraine, then we're going to be facing threats in the Baltics, Poland. He's said that he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. General, I just want you to know that the concern about tanks is bipartisan. I'm very frustrated that those tanks, they ought to be sitting in Rzeszów, Poland right now, ready as soon as the training is done. This counteroffensive that everybody is talking about, it's the longest wind-up for a punch in the history of the world, is going to be trench warfare, and it's going to involve tanks. That's why the tank was invented at the end of World War I. If our tanks don't get there until August or September, it may well be too late. And so I just want to urge you to I know you both have done an amazing job of logistics and working with the Ukrainians and integrating and supplying them with what they need. But this tank story is not satisfactory. The decision's been made. Okay, then let's get ready to execute it and cut through whatever the red tape is. I know you got to do the training, but the tank should be sitting there on the Polish border ready to go when that training is done. So I just hope you'll take back that this is a bipartisan concern on this committee. That coming in at the end, after the counteroffensive is just that will be looked on as a tragic mistake. I learned 5 years ago that the Russians have a doctrine called escalate to de-escalate, that they will use tactical nuclear weapons if they believe that they're about to have some kind of catastrophic loss on the battlefield. You were asked earlier, but I want to put a finer point on the question. Isn't it at least within the realm of the thinkable that Putin would use tactical nuclear weapons if indeed he felt that Crimea was at risk, or if there's a significant breakthrough by the Ukrainians in the south and east?
Thanks, Senator. It has certainly been mentioned by members of the Russian government as well as by observers on the Russian political scene. That is the potential or the possibility for using nuclear weapons.
And this is part of their military doctrine going back before this invasion.
Yeah, yes, sir. The exact conditions under which they would do that, I think, are not completely known. and might not be completely known to them. They might look good on paper, but then when the moment comes, it might be harder to decide.
Well,
we have some insights into it, Senator, that I'd be, of course, eager to share with you in closed session. But again, as I said a few moments ago, our deterrence, our escalation management so far, as well as our deterrence, have held very well so far, and I feel comfortable where we are right now.
Deterrence is the key. They have to understand that there will be a response that would be very costly to them. Deterrence is the heart of our, as you know, of our entire military strategy. Iron Dome. Wouldn't Iron Dome help? Why don't we have Iron Dome in Ukraine?
Sir, Iron Dome clearly could help. And the things that we have provide help also.
Oh, I agree. But Iron Dome seems to be particularly calibrated to the kind of low-level attacks that are coming in by drones and missiles.
Yeah, I can't speak to exactly why Iron Dome in particular is not there, sir. If I could defer that to the working group that develops those solutions.
I would, if you could take that for the record, I would really like to know, because we certainly helped to fund the development of Iron Dome, and it just seems to me that it fits in this situation, and we've moved Patriots in, and as you mentioned earlier, air defense is one of the most crucial things that the Ukrainians need. So I would like if you could take for the record some thoughts on how we could move forward with Iron Dome.
I sure will, Senator King. Thanks.
And you talked about China. It seems to me China can play either a useful role or a destructive role. And the jury is out on which direction. We've seen some hopeful diplomatic moves in the last 24 hours, but if they start supplying significant material to the Russians, that also could tip the balance in the wrong direction. Would you agree to that?
I absolutely agree with that, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator, I believe Senator Budd.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you both for your service. It's great to have a former Deputy Commanding General of the 82nd Airborne Division before the committee, so thank you for your service, especially in North Carolina. General Cavoli, I have a few questions I'd like to ask about our foreign military sales process. And I've asked these questions, similar questions, of other geographic combatant commanders, and I'm hoping to finish this up with you. I'd appreciate, on the first part, just yes or no on each one, and then at the end, I'll have opportunity for you to expand, if you would. So is the current foreign military sales process, is it fast and flexible enough to meet our foreign partners' security needs in your area of responsibility?
No, Senator.
Does the transfer of U.S. defense articles build our partners' capacity to provide for their own defense?
Absolutely, Senator.
Does the FMS increase the interoperability between the U.S. military and those countries we sell defense articles to?
Absolutely, Senator. It's one of the most important aspects of our foreign military sales.
Thank you. Given the outstanding performance of U.S. defense systems in Ukraine versus the lackluster performance of Russian systems, are you seeing an increase in FMS requests from our European allies and partners?
Without a doubt, Senator, there is an enormous appetite around the world for U.S. armaments right now.
Thank you. And what particular systems are in demand right now?
Sir, the ones that have been on display, the HIMARS system, the Gimler's rockets, radar systems, the Patriot missile system is in high demand, but I would point out that just about all U.S. armaments are looked upon around the world with great desire. There's great appetite for them.
Thank you, General. And from your view, how are these FMS challenges impacting strategic competition with China and Russia on the European continent?
Well, sir, in Europe specifically, they don't impact too much because the Chinese and the Russians aren't selling too much war material inside Europe. Clearly not to NATO, for example. And in fact, our European allies, with our assistance, are in the process of divesting their Soviet-era stuff. However, as you may know, I used to be the commander of U.S. Army Europe and Africa. in places like Africa, it's very difficult for us to compete if it takes us a long time to deliver a set of Humvees to a nation. But it takes China, 6 months to put them on a boat and roll them in there. It gets hard to compete in that regard. So speed is, I think, your point. Speed in foreign military sales is an essential part of delivering the influence that we seek when we conduct those sales.
Thank you, General. General Van Ovost, in North Carolina, we couldn't be more proud of the Military Ocean Terminal Sunny Point, which I had a chance to visit recently, and the 596 Transportation Brigade, the unit who oversees it. In the past, there have been concerns about staffing and funding shortages at Sunny Point and the nation's other terminals. Can you please provide an update on those issues and what resources, if any, are needed to ensure these critical transportation nodes are prepared to support the nation's needs?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for visiting Matsu. It's a critical ammunition outload location for America. And so as we look at both Matsu and Matco in California, we are working closely with the Army and the Department of Defense to ensure that they have the resources they need so that we can protect and keep the capabilities there. As you probably know, infrastructure, I think about that, especially with contested logistics, that those would be, a point of interest for our aggressors to try to slow down. So from a cyber perspective, an infrastructure perspective, the berthing perspective, we want to make sure that they're working well. And the 596, I couldn't be prouder of the work that they have done to support General Cavoli and the outload to Ukraine. That's a really critical point for us. And their readiness, again, when I think about day-to-day readiness and readiness to the future, the number one thing you can do for us to ensure our readiness is to pass an on-time budget because that cedes both time and money to the enemy.
Thank you, General. Chairman, just a question. I didn't see the time reset. Do I have time for one more question? Thank you. General Van Ovost, do you have any concerns about cyber attacks that could slow down the flow of forces or material in crises or conflict? And if so, what's TRANSCOM doing about it?
Senator, cyber is one of the major concerns that we have because we have a large, what we call surface attack area across the logistics network from end to end. So we are looking very closely at cyber hardening practices, not just in the U.S., not just on the Department of Defense systems, but our civilian systems within the defense industrial base and with our allies and partners. So it is critical that we stay focused on that, and we have. The other thing is our ability to command and control. We must have secure command and control, secure communications, and updated cryptographic materials so that we can maintain a consistent flow of logistics at a time and place of our choosing.
Again, thank you both, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Budd. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to both of you for your service to our country. General Cavoli, nowhere in the world is the power of our alliances clearly more evident than what we're seeing in NATO right now. And through the National Guard's Bureau's State Partnership Program, the Michigan National Guard has supported the alliance through our partnership with Latvia for now nearly 30 years. One of the advantages of the state partnership programs is that it provides NATO an opportunity to utilize CONUS-based facilities for training purposes. A complaint that I've heard from other combat commanders is the lack of suitable training facilities in their ARR and how that's going to and how oftentimes it complicates partner force training. So my question for you is, what is your current capacity for training in your ARR? And given the renewed focus on our NATO allies on defense issues, would you benefit from having a CONUS location that could be used for training similar to what the Latvians have been doing in northern Michigan for many, many years?
Thanks, Senator. And, again, as I mentioned a couple of moments ago to one of the other members, the state partnership program is just invaluable to us in U.S. EUCOM. I think the other geographic combatant commanders share my opinion. Inside Europe, we have plenty of training capacity right now for the U.S. forces as well as for our allies. There's quite a bit in Western Europe of training capacity, training facility capacity that existed for larger armed forces during the Cold War. In our Eastern European allies, however, there are some things that we need to get done. As you know, Latvia has been building quite a bit, has been improving quite a bit. Throughout the Baltics, it's necessary. It's necessary for a couple of reasons, not just for the host nation, but because in order to reinforce that host nation with NATO forces at a time of need, those forces would need to continue to train in place in the country to maintain the readiness necessary. So all three of our Baltic as well as our Polish allies are working hard on their training areas in that regard. Latvia's activities in the United States have been very useful to Latvia. They have other ones throughout Europe, and I think a good mix is a useful thing. It's a useful thing especially because it's useful for countries like Latvia to get a chance to go back to the States and to interact with their state partners on their state partners' home ground and see the way our systems work there as well. As a matter of strict capacity, not as necessary, but as a matter of benefit, it's been huge.
Great, thank you. My next question for you, sir, is in your opening statements, you mentioned UConn's efforts to conduct activities in the information environment, cyberspace, and electromagnetic spectrum to counter Russian aggression and other malign activities in Europe. So my question is, as the joint force moves towards data-centric concepts to synchronize common operation pictures for the joint force, are you comfortable with DoD's current platforms for COP management and the capacity to display an accurate common operations picture for not only our joint forces, but for our allies and our partners as well?
Thanks for the question, sir. I don't think you'd find any of my combatant commander colleagues who is anything but eager for the advances that we're working on inside the department right now, specifically the JADC2, the Joint All-Domain Command and Control System, which is intended to link any sensor to the best shooter as quickly as possible. In my case, being the commander of European Command as well as the Allied Command Operations Commander, it's imperative that that JADC2 be combined JADC2 so that we can share it with our allies. In the allied space, no, sir, I am not satisfied. We have work to do, and I'm eager for the efforts of the department to continue to bear fruit.
Thank you. General Van Ovost, during your testimony to the House Armed Service Committee and with me in our discussion in my office, you highlighted the ongoing challenges with contested logistics and the task to conduct air refueling missions within that contested and degraded environment. So given these challenges and persistent threats, how are you working with the services to prioritize and really replicate training scenarios similar to potential threats from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Contested logistics is first and foremost in our minds on all of our development, our requirements development, and our exercise development out into the future, especially in things like air refueling, which is my most stressed ability. We are working to try to first understand ourselves. We are using what we just talked about here with JADC2 to understand where our data is, the ITV to understand what is going on, what's in motion, and we're beginning to develop predictive analytics to understand what needs to be moved in a predictive manner so we can marry up our scarce resources with the highest priorities, something like we're doing today with Ukraine, being agile enough to change out our priorities. So I think about the exercise, as we lay down the exercise, we're trying to get after those gaps, giving them hard problems to solve, loss of command and control, loss of precision navigation and timing, trying to get understanding of commander's intent all the way down to the tactical echelon. And we're doing this not just in Europe, but across all of the continents. And we have a heavy, heavy emphasis in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2014, after Russia moved into Crimea, NATO countries agreed to raise defense spending to at least 2% of their GDP by 2024. Last year, 8 years after that pledge, only 7 of the 30 NATO countries met that goal. Prosperous nations like France and Germany still lag well behind that goal. And I know there's been some discussion about when we're delivering tanks, but we're talking about over the course of that period of time, billions and billions and billions of dollars from NATO countries that seemingly refuse to ante up to protect themselves and Europe. And so, General, I want to ask you a question. If those additional billions of dollars would have been designated for defense, wouldn't that have gone a long way in deterring Russian aggression?
Sir, thanks for the question. You know, first of all, you would have to look pretty far to find somebody who was a bigger advocate than me of all our allies spending 2%. In fact, in my confirmation hearings, I made clear that I consider 2% to be a floor.
Right.
There are shopping lists that have to be filled out there. There are readiness requirements that have to be filled out there, and they're going to require money, and I believe 2% is a floor, not a ceiling. Where we are right now, so in 2014, we had an average spending of 1.4% of GDP, sir, across the alliance. Now we're at 1.8%, which is still short. We've got 10 allies with the addition of Finland this year. We've got 10 allies who currently spend 2% or more. We've got 11 allies who have a credible plan to get there, some of them enshrined in law, to get there by 24, which was the goal, but that leaves 10. And
yeah, and I have to tell you.
I encourage them to.
Yeah, and I know you're in kind of a unique position with your role, but I have to tell you, you know, in the United States, I think it's like 54% of the share of the GDP of all those NATO countries, and we provide 70% of the funding. I think the American taxpayer is getting a little weary, essentially, of subsidizing these Western democratic socialist states. So when they're not investing in their military to defend their backyard, they're using that money on social programs that we may or may not agree with, but yet the United States continues to have to hold the bag. And we're having legitimate questions today about delivery of weapon systems, but I would argue that if they were actually meeting what they should be doing on their own continent, Russian aggression would have either been deterred or, you know, Ukraine would have what they need. And I want to ask about one country in particular, France. You know, President Macron recently visited communist dictator Xi and said that it's not in Europe's interest to strongly support Taiwan and stand allied with the United States. I find this comment, by the way, totally insane. Do you have a sense that France is on their way to meeting their NATO obligations, this amount of funding? Because that's a pretty bold statement for the president of a country that kind of refuses to live up to their own commitments.
Senator, I of course, you know, read the coverage of those comments and everything, and I think I'll leave commentary on them to my civilian leadership.
Fair enough.
I am a huge advocate of burden sharing, sir, and I believe the plans that we're working on in NATO will create the blueprint to get to that.
Well, that's probably a question more for Secretary Blinken. General Van Ovost, I want to ask you, after the disastrous withdrawal of from Afghanistan by President Biden, what was left behind was $48 million worth of ammunition, 80 aircraft, 23,000 Humvees, 250,000 automatic rifles, 95 drones, 42,000 pieces of night vision surveillance, biometric, and positioning equipment. I mean, it's unbelievable. And of course, you were charged with scrambling and saving over 19,000 people from perhaps one of the most embarrassing moments in American foreign policy history. My question to you is, where did all that equipment go? Where is it? Do we know?
Senator, I'm not familiar with where the equipment is, but I could tell you that the Afghanistan retrograde presented a really an unprecedented situation. We had a rapidly evolving security deterioration there on the ground, and I am proud of how the U.S. service members were able to evacuate and take care of our Afghan citizens.
No, I agree, and I applaud you for that. And in fact, a serviceman from Missouri, Jared Schmitz, lost his life that day. And I don't think we talk about it enough. I mean, I believe this would be bipartisan. What happened there is inexcusable. And I just mentioned the equipment, not the loss of life, to compound all of that. And I know you were charged with that. And just finally, well, I'm out of time. I just appreciate what you do. But the idea that we left all of that behind and lost those lives, and there's not a word of it. In fact, I guess a most recent report was trying to blame a previous administration and inject politics into this. It was just an abject failure by this administration, and we ought to get to the bottom of it, make sure it never happens again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Kane, Senator Rosen, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Reed. I appreciate you holding this hearing. I'd also like to thank Generals Cavoli and Van Ost for testifying today and for your service to our country. We really appreciate you. And General Cavoli, I want to talk a little bit about Ukraine, obviously, with both of you, and a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive, because Russia has committed significant manpower and equipment to launch offensives in Ukraine this past winter. We know that. Their gains have been limited, and their losses, we also know, have seemed to be significant. Nonetheless, the defense of these towns has not come without cost to Ukraine. And so my colleagues have been asking about sending equipment to Ukraine, talking about the counteroffensive. You've been speaking about that, and I just want to build upon that for a moment. So let's just include drones in the conversation, right? So what's your assessment of the use and effectiveness in the Ukrainian conflict of the short-range drones, the one-way attack anti-tank munitions that are being used right now? And could you also speak to what lessons we've learned about these kinds of weapons for our own force going on in the future and our defense industrial base?
Thank you, Senator. That has been one of the most interesting developments in this conflict. It was prefigured a little bit during the Azerbaijan-Armenia war 2 years ago, when Azerbaijan used unmanned aerial vehicles extremely effectively. Both sides are using them very extensively. Both sides are using surveillance drones as well as armed drones as well as one-way attack drones. They meet varying degrees of success. They can be shot down. They can be shot down with small arms. They can be shot down with standard machine guns. They can mostly be shot down with missiles as well. They can also be stopped with electromagnetic interference, and we see that going both ways. And that's providing a very good learning experience for us as we consult with the Ukrainians, and we're incorporating those through our services and through our commands. We're incorporating those lessons to stay ahead of that EMI interference especially. Some of them have been proven very effective as weapons, and some of them have proven pretty effective. We have been in an iterative improvement cycle with regard to U.S. supply drones, ma'am.
Well, that's great, and I'm glad to see. I'd like to follow up with you on being sure we have enough R&D and enough dollars and programs there for public partnerships, wherever that is, with the Department of Defense to expand these UAS programs. They're really important, and that leads me into my next question about defense innovation, because in 2021, NATO launched the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. We call it DIANA. And the goal of DIANA is to sharpen our technological edge by working with the private sector to integrate emerging dual-use technologies and rapidly scale these innovations, because things are happening right as we speak, right on the battlefield. Lives are being lost, and maybe these can help save that. And so the U.S. government doesn't have the authority to contribute to R&D initiatives which receive funding from other nations. So we would need to provide specific authority to allow the U.S. to make contributions to NATO DIANA by this October for us to have the opportunity to be a full participant. So General Cavoli, again, would you support Congress providing the authority for us to contribute to DIANA and really be that innovator? And can you speak of the value for us to be part of this group with the entire NATO alliance?
As you know, Senator, DIANA is emerging right now.
Yeah.
So far they've got about 54 initiatives that they're working on, but the budget is fairly small. Defense innovation and then procurement is national business for the most part in NATO, but especially for allies without significant defense budget bases, it's useful to collaborate. I think the U.S. collaboration with them is great, and I would advocate such authority, ma'am.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to build on that, too, because we know things are happening technologically faster than we can keep up oftentimes. And so as the war in Ukraine obviously has progressed, we've seen proliferation of the relatively cheap, easy-to-use, all the commercial drones that are out there. You can just buy them off probably any internet website, right, for both intelligence and reconnaissance, for surveillance and kinetic missions. Can you maybe expand on us working again in whatever sectors we can here, public-private, to deliver advanced capabilities using some of these technologies that are emerging in the private sector?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I would advocate any way for us to innovate quicker and adopt things more quickly. You know, with regard to the commercial drones, they've been very, very present on the battlefield in Ukraine. They tend to have a fairly limited lifespan, however. It's harder to find commercial drones that are adequately hardened against electromagnetic interference, for example. But they've been enormously effective at the lowest levels for squads and things like that to spot things.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We'll follow up with you on all of these. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to each of our witnesses for your service. I so appreciate it. General Cavoli, I want to sort of flag an issue that I don't really want you to answer. It may be an appropriate, it could be appropriate in the follow-up session that we will have that will be classified, but here's a concern. In my time on the committee, and particularly in the last couple of years, I've sometimes been struck by blue sky scenarios being painted that turn out not to be accurate. A blue sky scenario about the capacity of the Afghan security force in the aftermath of the withdrawal turned out to be vastly overstated. And there was somewhat of an overestimation of the likelihood of Russia being dominant in the early days of the Ukraine investigation. Thank goodness that proved not to be true. But in each instance, sort of what we were being told, the capacity of our intelligence about the capacity of another military turned out to be overstated. The reason I'm just flagging this now in the EUCOM domain is I've been part of 3 classified briefings about Ukraine, one in Foreign Relations on January 25th, 2 in SASC on February 2nd and March 2nd, where certain predictions or assessments were made about Ukrainian capacities, the potential for the counteroffensive. When the leaked documents have come out, I've not looked at those documents, but I followed the public accounts of it. A lot of the accounts of the documents suggest internally in the Pentagon maybe more skepticism than we were being messaged in the meetings that we had. And again, I don't think the right time is to talk about this now, but I hope during the next session that we have, we may dig into that a little bit, because I want to make sure that the assessments being given to this committee are, the best current information, so that we are not led to believe one thing when there may be a lot of folks in the Pentagon thinking something else. And so I'll leave that there if I could, but I do think it's something we ought to discuss in the classified setting.
I look forward to that, sir.
Great. General Van Ovost, I have got a couple for you. In the Indo-PACOM, our ability to access logistics support is going to be absolutely critical. And there are some challenges because of distances across water that are not necessarily challenges elsewhere. How is Transcom considering supporting the joint force in a contested logistics environment like the Indo-PACOM?
Thank you, Senator. It's something we think of every day. You know, we are postured to operate on a global scale, but our adversaries are growing in their capabilities to disrupt, degrade, or deny our ability and our freedom of maneuver that we've so enjoyed around the globe. In fact, as I think about European Command and Europe, we enjoy very robust ground lines of communications, and we're able to use essentially all of them, frankly, without impedance. As I think about the Indo-Pacific, we're going to be using more of fast sea lift and air than we would be in ground like we're seeing. So we have to change our tactics, techniques, and procedures. We're working with the services on their concepts to ensure that we can integrate end-to-end across the entire deployment distribution enterprise so we can deliver where and when Admiral Aquilino needs it.
And then one other question in that space, global bulk fuel. And again, in the Indo-PACOM, that could be particularly challenging. What are you doing to do planning around fuel accessibility to Indo-PACOM missions?
Senator, U.S. Transportation Command has been designated the single manager for global bulk fuel in this latest Unified Command Plan that just came out. And so what we're doing is we're taking a new approach of synchronizing end-to-end fuel so that we can assuredly deliver where and when we need it in a contested environment. So we're taking the very best of what DLA Energy does to combine it with what we do for global command and control and prioritization and managing in this new environment. So we are relooking the posture of the fuel in the Pacific. That includes not only the stations, the places we're going to keep it, both on land and on the water, as well as how we're going to maneuver fuel around that area. And let me just to add to that, we have robust fuel capability in the European theater, as we did in the Central Command theater. And so this is, a concern we have right now. We're getting right after it with our tanker security program, with movement of fuel, and also with our ability to really look and give a real feasibility assessment on the ability to do that war fight to the Indo-PACOM commander. And I could not do it without your support for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which allows us additional funds to do exercising and interoperability and to lay out the logistics posture that we're going to need in the future.
Thank you both very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you. Good morning to our witnesses. General Van Ovost, thank you for your discussion last week, highlighting all the great work TRANSCOM is doing at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. TRANSCOM is the linchpin of projecting and sustaining the force, key to our strategic deterrent. I also recognize that joint force sustainment is a whole of government and whole of nation effort. TRANSCOM must coordinate and balance equities across multiple government agencies, numerous industry partners, and diverse allies and partners in order to project and sustain combat power. General Van Ovost, I don't think enough people realize how complex your mission really is and how critical that message is, and how critical the people in TRANSCOM are to tackle their everyday mission. Can you speak, just for an example, to the efforts that your command is supporting right now, both at headquarters at Scott Air Force Base and around the world, just to paint a picture of how complex your mission is?
Thank you, ma'am. We've discussed our key priority of supporting European Command in supporting Ukraine and their defense. But beyond that, we have supported down the State Department with Sudan with the support for moving the diplomats out of Sudan in this recent crisis. We were inside 24 hours of the devastating series of earthquakes in Turkey. Our ability to launch out within 24 hours the urban search and rescue teams with the dogs and the cement breaking equipment to get to their rescue, as well as deliver a 100-bed field hospital. We are doing extensive exercises around the globe in almost every continent to increase the interoperability with our allies and partners and to ensure access spacing and overflight and agreements that's going to keep our freedom maneuver into the future. We are also, of course, doing the global bulk fuel mission. And of course, I can't forget our families. We're moving 311,000 families a year all around the globe to achieve our mission.
Thank you. Your witness testimonies both underscore your combatant command's effort to exercise the joint force. In EUCOM exercise Defender Europe 24, General Cavoli and General Van Ovost, Defender Europe 24 will assemble a division-level formation on NATO's eastern flank for the first time since the Cold War, and I quote your testimony. TRANSCOM is regularly wargaming with partners and stakeholders to identify and close operational gaps to strengthen deterrence and develop new concepts to prevail. If both of you could answer this question, can you explain how your combatant commands have exercised with each other and other combatant commands? What is the relationship between geographic and functional combatant commands as the joint force looks to exercise, experiment, and integrate new tools and capabilities? I know I'm very macro today.
Thank you, Senator. No, that's a great question because it gives me an opportunity to talk a moment about TRANSCOM. So geographic combatant commands are responsible for delivering military results in a specific AOR. There are other commands that are in charge of a specific function, usually globally. And General Van Ovost obviously does transportation. Everything in U.S. EUCOM depends on the reinforcement that Jackie's forces can provide from CONUS. It is remarkable. We exercise it literally every day, ma'am, for routine movements, for rotational force movements, as well as for exercises. I said in my opening statement, there is literally nothing in the world like U.S. Transportation Command.
Thanks, and ma'am, we are participating in an extensive series of exercises across the joint portfolio that allow us to increase our capabilities, to test new concepts, and frankly, old concepts like convoy operations with not only the United States and our allies and partners. And I appreciate the comments by General Cavoli. Functional combatant commanders do bring extensive experience in our specific areas, space, strategic nuclear deterrence, and in transportation, and it's an honor to work with them.
Thank you. General Van Ovost, we had a good conversation about aeromedical evacuations. I'd like to sort of expand on that a little bit, especially as it applies in a contested environment and the vast distances of our nation's joint force that we might be facing in the future, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. Can you speak to efforts currently underway at U.S. Transcom to bolster the critical aeromedical evacuation capability? And also, what are you doing to provide our wounded service members rapid access to medical care? Because we talked about maybe they have to go someplace in between, especially when you're in a place like the South Pacific.
Thank you, ma'am. This is a critical question. You know, we have performed brilliantly over decades with the golden hour.
I know.
And countless people saved, ma'am, yourself included. But you know, in a near peer, a global power contest, we expect high casualty rates. In fact, I expect to be able to have to move the same amount of patients I moved in 2022 the entire year on a weekly basis. So we've got to do something differently. And here's what we're going to do. We are working with other partner nations to try to understand what capabilities that they have, both in theater and their movement capabilities. We're working with the services on a multimodal platform to move patients in mass form. We are working on innovative capabilities for patient movement items. And we're also looking at ability to have smaller crews of people work on larger numbers of patients via using wireless and talking to doctors that are on the ground while we're in the air. So we want to bring all of this together to try to reduce the risk. And to your point on allies and partners, where there is capacity with allies and partners, we're looking into agreements to try to ensure that they'll be able to support us as an interim location until we can get them back to the United States.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Manchin, please.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you all for your service. Everybody here, I appreciate very much. General Cavoli, I just had the pleasure of being able to go to Ukraine and speak with Zelensky, and I was with Senator Kelly and Senator Murkowski. It was a great trip. We learned an awful lot about that, and we talked directly to them. Our main concern was transparency. For every dollar that we're sending in, for every bullet that we're sending there, making sure it's being accounted for and used properly. And that was our biggest concern. We took it to everybody we talked to in Poland, and also, we went to the staging area in Poland, and they told us that after it leaves there, that the tracking is not as good from once they leave it in Poland, put it in the theater. So we're trying to work with our ambassador there, Brink. She has, with a little bit of help there, some personnel, she'll be able to track it much better, but they're staying on top of it. I left very satisfied knowing that we have good grasp, and they knowing how sensitive this is, because the naysayers that we have, and you have them everywhere to a certain extent, but they're a minority, I don't want to give them any credence whatsoever or credibility that something happened wrong. We shouldn't be sending equipment, we shouldn't be supporting, and we shouldn't be financing it. How do you feel about that? And you are, I'm sure, tracking the same thing.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your recent trip, and thanks to your staff for sharing your after-action review of your trip. Also, it's very useful to us. So I feel confident that there has not been specific illicit transfer or pilfering of material. I believe we're aware of one case reported to us by the Ukrainians of a couple of automatic rifles that were attempted to be diverted, and those guys have been arrested. And so by and large, this is an extremely strong effort that we're putting out. We recognize how challenging it is. However, a couple of things about the way we do it. So when things go to the staging base in Jerzonka in Poland there, We inventory all of it
Right.
at that point.
I saw the clipboard. I saw all those pasties on the board.
And then we ingest it into a computer software system that we've given to the Ukrainians that we maintain access to, so we can track their tracking of it.
Where they're putting the equipment. Yeah.
Exactly, and so we track it.
Let
through
me
them.
just say, I know our time limit.
Okay.
I want to say a couple things here. I truly believe that we're not telling our story. With the amount of support that we're putting in and all of our allies, there's always going to be a hiccup. Something's going to go wrong. We haven't built the base of how well we're regulating and staying on top of this and monitoring and the transparency. If Zelensky said it once to me in an hour and a half we were there, he said it 10, 15 times. Bring 100 people in, observe what we're doing. We're happy to share. Do whatever you want. And if you see something wrong, let me know because we're looking for it too. We're not telling that from our side of it. And it's not being, and I just think that we need to get ahead of this because that way, there's an old saying, tell your story before they tell one on you. As soon as they see something wrong, they're going to blow it out of proportion. And there's so much good support that we're giving them and so much valiant fighting that they're doing. I just don't want to lose that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell part of the story, sir. Our defense attaché office has been diligently going
Well,
after
tell the press,
this
tell your press people to start putting things out. We're happy to work with them. We're happy to coordinate with you all to put out what we saw firsthand and the confidence we had. I put a statement out. I'm happy to continue that.
Thanks, Senator.
Let me throw this at you too. I'm concerned now about our Baltic allies in Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia, Romania, and Slovenia. They're all kind of tied into this Turk Stream, okay? The same as the Nord Stream is tied into Europe. They're tied into Turk Stream. We know exactly what Putin will do. He used energy as a weapon. Are we doing anything so they don't get caught in the same thing that our allies did up in Europe?
Sir, thanks. So, of course, the closure of Nord Stream and the weaning off of Russian gas through much of Europe has been an incredible success story of the last year. It is not universal, however, as you point out.
We got a lot of vulnerability down here, and he'll have the same playbook.
And it's exactly, sir. It's the exact same playbook. So we work with them to wean off it. We're not the lead agency on that. I'd defer to the Secretary of State or the Department of State for specifics on what exactly they're doing.
Okay.
But we are operationally not dependent.
I'll reach out to them because I'm chairman of the Energy Committee.
Yes, sir.
We want to do everything we can to basically back them up so they don't get caught exactly like our European allies did.
Strategically, it would be very welcomed by EUCOM and NATO.
Can you briefly comment on developments regarding Turkey's relationship with NATO? I just can't believe that here they are holding up the Swedes, okay, made it very difficult for the Finns, and they're playing footsies with the Russians. Makes no sense to me at all.
Sir, clearly there's a lot of policy wrapped in there, and I'll defer to my civilian leaders on those questions. I would point out, sir, that there is a sharp difference between our military relationships and our other relationships when it comes to some countries. And I was just down in Antakya with the Minister of Defense and the Turkish Chad a couple of days ago, looking at the humanitarian assistance that we've provided through the U.S. and NATO for the earthquake. And I would just point out there's a pretty distinct difference between our military relationship.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
But didn't they acquire the S-400 from the Russians?
Oh, yes, sir, yeah.
And they canceled F-35s?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. So you think I need to take this in a different direction? I got you. I got you. I know.
The policy issue, sir.
I got it, sir. I got it. I will, too. Thank you both, and thank all of you for your service. I appreciate it more than you know.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. General Cavoli, General Van Ovost, thank you for your testimony. I look forward to the closed session, which will reconvene at 12:30 in SVC 217 after the address by the South Korean president. I'm sure one of the issues that might come up is the Abrams tank. I understand that there are some significant issues involving transferring Abrams tanks to any place in the world, one of which I think can be publicly discussed here is that it operates on something closer to jet fuel than diesel, which makes the creation of independent supply lines by the Ukrainians essential to use. There's also the issue of training, and the fact that our European allies, I believe, have supplied thousands of tanks, which are more familiar to the Ukrainian forces, which obviates the training issues related to the Abrams tank. So I think all those issues have to be explored in the closed session. I think also, General Van Ovost, a real serious discussion about contested logistics, particularly in the Pacific, would be appropriate. So let me see if there's anything else. No, I believe that's, one other point, General Cavoli, is that there's been discussion about reevaluating what our plans for Europe, looking at the depletion of Russian forces. But I think you're also considering the fact that many of our NATO forces have depleted themselves of equipment and other factors that have to be included in the evaluation. So it's not simply looking at Russia and saying, well, they're much weaker now than they were. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and it's very difficult to speak about an open session for operational security reasons.
I understand. Well, I think we've got a lot to talk about. So I will adjourn this open hearing and look forward to seeing you at 12:30 in SVC 217. Thank you.